everyone. My name is Jesse Chaison with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Airing Addiction. Happy Recovery Month. If you're listening to us or watching us on Facebook Live or later today, it is September 13th, so we're just about halfway through Recovery Month. Still plenty more activities planned and more episodes planned. So this particular guest we were chatting before we hit record here, I have heard of his story for quite a while and excited to hear it from him today. So without further ado, I will bring it over to Lisa to introduce who we have today. Who do we got, Lisa?
Thanks so much, Jesse, and happy Recovery Month, everybody. I'm really excited for our guest. I really appreciate your willingness to join us, Chris. But today we have Chris Curtis, who's been in sports radio. Many of you have probably heard of him because he's been doing this for over 20 years in Boston. He's now the executive producer at WEEI's Boston Sports Original. And he's really here with us today. He does a lot of support for New England Recovery Center and Spectrum, but he's here to talk about his own story and share that with us today. So with that, Chris, do you want to start us off by just sharing as much or as little about your own recovery journey as you'd like?
Sure. So Lisa, Jesse, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be partnered with you guys at New England Recovery Center. And I guess I'm an alcoholic. And I was a quasi-functioning alcoholic from about, I guess, freshman, sophomore year of college. It began as a everyday event. And like most people who are alcoholics, it wasn't this overnight, it hit me. I remember the real turning point for me. So I went to Boston College and, got into sports radio, interned in sports radio. And from 2000 until today, I've been either interning or working at one of the sports radio stations in Boston. The first sort of the turning point of my drinking really was in 2009. I had, so that's about a decade of drinking every day. But I was, I hung out with guys that drank a lot. I would always have an excuse to watch a sporting event, which always led to, okay, well, it's my job. I can have a drink and do my job at the same time. But I had just been hired part-time at ESPN Radio in Connecticut. And I was scheduled to go down for a training day with my new boss and get to know the equipment and everything. And there just happened to be an ice storm in Hartford. So I was stuck in Boston, and I had taken the day off from my regular job at then ESPN Radio in Boston. So I started drinking at about 10 a.m. And that's when the daily morning alcohol consumption began. That sort of was like the Mason-Dixon line for me. What was a functional thing to do with friends socially for work became something I had to conceal every day. So from that point on, things just evolved. Even as my career sort of continued, I got a job working nights at 98.5 The Sports Hub in this building that I'm sitting at now with WEEI to show the world truly is flat. And so I worked at night, which was awful for my lifestyle because I would drink during the day while working and then get into work and then find a way to, sneak off. When you're at a radio station at night, there's hardly anybody around. So it's much easier to be negligent and to not do your job as you're supposed to. So anyway, so that started. And then I got a job working mornings with Dennis and Callahan at WEEI in 2013. And that was even worse for my lifestyle because I would drink it was this eerie feeling. At 3:30, I would drink while watching Nessun, which had ads to call numbers to stop drinking. And then we were on Nessun, and I'd get to work, and it would be about hiding the alcohol in certain places. And eventually, 3 years later of that lifestyle, I started to get really sick. I was sick in the morning. I had nosebleeds that were almost permanent whenever I'd sneeze. I was really just, family members were deeply concerned. I had an intervention in 2015 in Florida at Christmas with my family, where they had discovered, I had told them I had stopped drinking, which nobody really believed, but they found a handle of gin in the well of my dad's car where I'd been concealing it. And so I somehow talked my way out of it, which is the blessing and a curse of being decent at speaking for a living. And then it really hit ahead. I'm sorry if this is a little too meandering, but it hit ahead April 24th, 2016. I was going to a Celtics playoff game and shaving before the game. And at this point, I'm about 300 pounds, bloated, just totally unrecognizable. And I cut myself when I was shaving. As guys, or women too, I mean, we all cut ourselves. You hop in the shower, we all move on. No big deal. Well, it just didn't stop. So I went to the local Walgreens to try and find combat gauze or anything to create a stop to the blood. I patched myself up to the best of my ability because not being able to go to the game would have required an explanation. So I met my friend. We went to the game. I got home after the game, took the Band-Aid off, and blood started pouring again. And that is when I had the last drink I have had. And I tried to patch it up and went back to bed. And I woke up at about 2 a.m. and I had my pillow was totally soaked in blood. So at that point, I drove myself to Boston Medical Center because if I woke my wife up and she would have known. And so I just thought it was something I could talk my way out of again. And I initially lied to the nurses and said I didn't drink very much. They did some blood work. And the next thing I remember was about 4 days later, waking up in the ICU. They had saved my life. I had liver failure, and my bilirubin count was 24. I was jaundice, and I was in the hospital there for about a week. And I made a plan to go to a rehab facility about a week later, which took a lot of string pulling because I was so sick that even the place that I was at, which was designed for really sick people, was concerned about me. And I just started, my recovery on April 25th, 2016. And this past April 25th, I celebrated 7 years of sobriety. So that's sort of the full story of the beginning, middle, and end of my drinking life.
So feel free to jump in wherever you want, Jesse, but it's such a compelling story on how it starts the way that so many start, right? That, just college drinking. Like when I train, and I train on addiction all the time, right? I often talk about, we don't know how many of the college kids that are drinking daily in college are going to just stop that behavior when they get a job and their lifestyle changes a bit, and how many it's going to be a permanent challenge for, right? There's no test you can take when you're in college that says, you probably shouldn't drink every day because that's not going to end well for you, right?
Right.
And really that's what, progressed over time. What happened for you, right, is that just escalated and escalated and escalated over time. And, your ability to function really, and do your job well probably made that so much harder for you to hit a level that kind of required or forced treatment.
Yeah. I mean, I always joke. So one of my best friends in college, we still talk to this day. He probably drank as much or more than I did in college. he's now a doctor. He's a psychiatrist. He's, and he was able to drink a lot and then turn it off for a month or whatever. Like he just, and I always sort of, that is such a great sort of lesson that whatever I have, he doesn't have. He's not better or worse. I'm not better or worse. But we each were successful enough to overcome that in college. And I was able to navigate this in a way where my dream was to do the job I was doing, and I was doing it while I was drunk. And the fact that I was able to succeed really emboldened the behavior that was actually the one thing that was going to derail my career, but it was the one thing I thought I needed in order to successfully navigate it.
Yeah. And Chris, thank you for sharing everything you did so far. I can relate a lot as somebody in recovery, as somebody who, as Lisa knows, loves the local Boston sports teams and everything that goes along with that. And I've certainly had experiences pre-sobriety where I thought I would have to pre-game and I couldn't show up to any sporting event sober. And it sounds like in your case, you were able to function, if you will, for many years through and even succeed, the journey you took us on through the different ESPN radios and then 98.5 and now EEI. I'm familiar with all those different jobs and sort of outposts of sports around here. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about, since April 24th, 2016, what life has been like for Chris.
Well, it's not exactly a straight line. And that was the one thing that
never is.
Was certainly beaten into me. I say that in a positive way by the people I met in meetings and the therapy and everything that I've, gone through. I remember I had a guy named Dr. Tom Ledoux. He's now in Wisconsin. And he was just such a brilliant guy. He was so helpful, instrumental in my life. And he said, I'm not going to lie to you and say that going to a game is going to be the same. It's going to be different. But you have to weigh that against everything else that will improve. And in the beginning, it's really a leap of faith because I hadn't had any stressful situation in my life without the support, which actually was what I thought was a support, which was in fact a detriment of alcohol to numb whatever it was in that moment. And he just was so right about, my favorite sports story is one where it would have never been this way. I watched Super Bowl 51, was the first Super Bowl as an adult that I watched without alcohol. And we had friends over and just neighbors. And at halftime, I just was like, I need, the Patriots are getting their butt kicked. I felt like I just didn't want anybody there the rest of the night. I had to watch the game. I wanted to watch it in peace. And as the comeback was ongoing, I just couldn't believe it. And then the win and the way I felt and being able to remember everything in just being able to get on the phone with all my buddies after and the texts and Twitter and everything. And it was just such a necessary affirmation of everything I had done at that point for about 9-10 months of sobriety. And that year, I went and covered the Super Bowl in Houston before the game. I flew home before it, which is Radio Row. And that was really isolating because at that time, only one person that I worked with knew I was an alcoholic, and he was back running Ken Laird, who's now the brand manager of WEEI. He had known and, obviously didn't tell anybody, but the people I was with, Jerry Callahan, very well-known guy, big drinker. We used to drink a lot together, and I didn't tell them. So I'm out on my own in Houston this week of parties, and it was really difficult, but it was easy in a way for me that I knew drinking again was going to kill me. So it wasn't exactly this difficult question. It was difficult to do, but it wasn't the stakes were clear. And to get home, the context, Super Bowl 49 was in Arizona, and we did the same thing, Radio Row. And the show there was 4 to 8 a.m. local time because of the time change. And so the Starbucks opened at 6 a.m. I parked, paid like through in the nose across the street with my rental car so that I could go get coffee, take the derail the walk to go to the car because it was secured, post 9/11, the Super Bowl areas are all like war zones. So you couldn't bring anything in. So I would go to the car twice over the course of the show to get alcohol at 5 a.m. local time. At this pinnacle of the career that I was pursuing, I was drinking at 5 a.m. in the back of a rental car. And then, 2 years later, I'm in Houston sober and, navigating it in a very different way. But the experiences of my career, the experiences of my life have been better than anything I could have envisioned in terms of the feeling, understanding the pain, navigating it in a way where you're fully aware of what you're doing and not having to check your phone in the morning to see who you called and what you said.
That's such a powerful example of both pre-recovery and post-recovery. And I'm sitting here and I can identify a lot with you, Chris. I've had an experience around the Super Bowl as well in 2007. The very famous way that we lost the Super Bowl, that we would have, completed the perfect season. I was blacked out, passed out, drunk. And I remember my now wife waking me up because we were in a place that wasn't ours and we were kind of just watching the game there. So now they wanted us to leave and thinking that we won, and very confused and very drunk and very just out of it. And it wasn't until years later when I watched the 11 Super Bowl with a good buddy of mine and mentor in recovery that I actually saw the David Tyree helmet catch. So, that was some years later, right? But, just these chunks of time and you talk about, you're at the pinnacle of your career and yet you're in the back of the rental car at 5 a.m. drinking. And I think that's important for anyone that listens to this. I'm sure there's people that are kicking around this recovery thing. I'm sure there's people, I know there's people because they've told me they've listened that are in recovery for some time. And it doesn't matter who you are, what job you have, right? Alcoholism is no respecter of persons. It can happen to anybody at any time. And I just thought that was really important that you mentioned that, here at this place that, we didn't even talk. I didn't even mention, it's secure, right? Post 9/11, the war zone that is Radio Row. And, you're risking everything so that you can have what you think you need to succeed at this job. But clearly you didn't need it because here we are today, sober, and you're running things. So,
it's a very it is a performance detractor. Like it is such a misnomer that we all allow ourselves to hear. Where if you can drink and you can drink so safely, I will never. God bless you. I'm never going to tell anybody what to do with their life. It's their life. And I have most people in my life drink safely without a problem, and it's no issue to me. If you need to be in a totally sober place, then do that. Like everybody's their own person, but don't ever drink thinking it makes anything actually better or makes you more talented. It doesn't. I mean, it negates skills. It negates our ability to understand whether we're talking too much, if we're being a little bit intrusive, whatever it could be. I think of all the things I didn't go to when I was covering the Super Bowls while I was drinking, because I just wanted to get to the hotel room, shut the door, and drink. Whereas thankfully, I went to Houston, went to Minneapolis, and went to Atlanta. And those trips, it was like, wow, I didn't even know they had these things at Super Bowls, I always was just like, okay, the show's over. Do we have to record anything? All right, I'll see you guys later. In those instances, it was just like I was experiencing them for the first time.
And you described so well kind of what it was like to actually watch that come back and remember every play. And sounds like you were able to kind of really immerse yourself in the actual every play of the game instead of focusing on what when you're going to get your next drink. How am I going to get through this? Can you describe what, you said you've had your dream job, you managed it with alcohol, not as well as you would have without for all those years you just clearly described, but what is it like to do your dream job now without alcohol? What's the difference in the day-to-day, the minute-to-minute?
Well, it's just, you're no longer looking in your rearview mirror trying to see if people are catching on to you. You just are able to look ahead. And it's so rewarding. The day I talked about being an alcoholic on the radio, I just thought I was unburdening myself of a secret. And I didn't tell anybody before I did it. And the people I had worked with were people who we literally would travel to spring training. We would go to Super Bowls, as I said. I mean, we would spend a lot of time together. And they were totally caught off guard. Oh, we have a fire drill outside. Everything's okay. I feel like I'm back in high school.
That's the beauty of live recording.
Right.
Yep.
Let me know if you can't hear me. But so when I talked about it, and radio is a very personal relationship as someone who grew up listening to the radio, where when you're talking, you're just talking like we are right now. But you're reaching so many people that you'll never know or meet. And so the relationship that I had to my job the day I told people that I'm an alcoholic was just like I changed everything. The amount of understanding and the amount of people that I've met through recovery, either they have children who are suffering or they have a spouse or themselves or they're, having a hard time. It's made something that always had meaning to me because of sports actually have meaning, because who I am and what I represent to a lot of people, that you can be, as I had a guy last Friday, a colleague of mine's best friend was going into rehab. And he said, hey, if you have a minute, could you do a video? He knows your story and knows about the recovery center. And I recorded it and I started crying because you immediately go back to that feeling of when you were going. I mean, I remember going to rehab and the lead up to it and all the ways in which we're made to feel like we're less than as men for getting help about something we need. And to have that position now that I've earned through my career and my recovery is something that just adds such a layer of gratitude to what I'm able to do every day.
Yeah. Now, Chris, I do have a question because you've mentioned it a couple times now, going to rehab. You were in ICU. They for those that are listening, and when Chris mentioned his bilirubin count, that means his liver was really sick. And that, maybe it was divine intervention that you did cut yourself and then, wasn't able to stop the bleeding. You end up in the ICU. Is there a connection to New England Recovery Center with your story?
Just that I found out about the New England Recovery Center. So there was a week that the Patriots had, I think they may have cut Josh Gordon. So the Patriots had Josh Gordon, who, for those of you who don't know, was a incredibly talented yet troubled receiver who had a really, really, really rough upbringing. And he was able to escape that upbringing through football, but he medicated heavily with alcohol and drugs. And when the Patriots released him, this was 2017 or maybe 2018. Yeah, I think this was, that's right. It was the year the Patriots went to the Super Bowl in Atlanta. So that's how I remember things. Sorry, it's about Patriots season.
It's okay.
I'm proud of. But so that Christmas, the Patriots cut him, and we had nobody hosting on a Friday night. And the day that he was cut, my boss at the time, Joe Zarbano, said, hey, what do you want to think, do a show? And I was like, oh, Resident Alky. Okay, you got it. And that night I did a show about how we all, it was really my first solo show ever. And I think people were caught off guard at the manner in which I handled it. And I think Matt Hockman from Odyssey was in touch with someone at the recovery center who had heard it and wanted to create a relationship based on the manner in which I was able to talk about such a serious issue with compassion, and then from there the sort of relationship was born. But when I was in, but the biggest thing about the elements of the ICU and then getting help is that I was told, as everybody is that has liver failure, that you must have 6 months minimum sobriety before you're even on a list, because they thought I would need a new liver. And those types of proclamations at the infancy of this are so unfathomable. Like, you are told that you can't have something which you thought you needed. I mean, I was in the ICU when I first woke up on my phone, seeing what time the liquor stores nearby open, not knowing that I was connected to an IV and a ventilator. You are just so fixated on that. And so what I thought when I first went to the New England Recovery Center is that this is a place that has such an understanding, acute understanding of what those days were like, and the aspect and element of it that is so familial, and the way they treat the whole situation. Because as the people I hope watching this know, and Recovery Month we should reassert it, is that nobody wakes up and says, I want to have a drink at 3 a.m. The days when I actually enjoyed drinking were like 15 years before I stopped. It's people have a issue with either depression, anxiety, personality disorders, bipolar, undiagnosed, untreated mental health leads to self-medication, which is got a broad spectrum of drugs to, eating disorders, to alcoholism, to whatever. But those are the way in which we see the problems manifest. But you don't treat alcoholism without treating the comorbidity that is leading to the desire to self-medicate.
Thanks so much for just recognizing the Long and Recovery Center there. And, because you talked about kind of how hard that step is for rehab. You don't know. It's hard to make the choice to enter treatment. It's hard to make that decision, knowing that, especially, for successful males, successful individuals, like, to ask for help is a really hard thing to do. And treatment's kind of a black box. You don't know what that looks like on the other side of the door. And so thanks so much for, recognizing that New England Recovery Center really does, take that holistic approach, take care of the whole family, the whole process. And a little side note related to Josh Gordon is I was interviewed by WEEI when the Patriots brought him on.
Oh, really?
Kind of saying, like, what do you think, Lisa, about how this should go? And really, if I remember correctly, I think most of my feedback was you got to give him a lot of support, right? And you got to, make sure he's well taken care of and not stigmatized. So that's just an interesting tie-in that you ended up doing the opposite end of that story when they let him go.
Too funny.
And if I can jump in too, I also have a Josh Gordon connection, believe it or not. When they did cut him, because of the nature of everything Chris had mentioned already about his career, for those that didn't know the issues he was dealing with, I actually reached out and somehow found an email connection to something related to the Patriots, and reached out as a person in recovery, sharing and offering support. So look at that. We all have that golden thread. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I too, Chris, follow the years by where the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, or what they do. And it's really a trip to sit here and talk to you about two of the most important things in my life, recovery being the most important, and then sports somewhere around, recovery, family, spirituality, sports, and maybe they interchange. So it's nice to know that I'm not the only one, and also have somebody who clearly is knowledgeable in all seriousness about this disease. And I heard you talk about the comorbidity and the fact that there is an underlying cause, right? I worked at the New England Recovery Center for a number of years, and I would tell families that walk through the door, as well as clients, that really alcohol and drugs, everyone thinks it's the problem. It can be the solution. And we need to figure out the problem. because people, as you were saying, were self-medicating, and that, sorry if there's an echo. I hear an echo here on my end. I hope it's okay on yours. But really, you take away the drugs and alcohol, and you're taking away maybe the only solution somebody ever had. And it's about finding a new solution. And it sounds like you found a new solution that works for you.
Yeah, and for me, I even about 3 years into my sobriety, I finally diagnosed the problem, and it's not something I've really discussed a lot, but it's we all of our families and even ourselves, we get enraged at the substance, and we get enraged at the act of using the substance in the manner in which it was in a manner in which it was not intended. And I get it, right? Like my mom or, anybody who sees their child or husband or whoever, colleague in these states, you get mad at that. And what I think my time at the New England Recovery Center and speaking with the people that work there, that really stood out to me was how there is just this very strong understanding and a strong will to express the true understanding of the problem so that people who have never faced addiction can understand their loved one's plight, and that the goal here is not to just remove the substance. That's how we save their life. So we remove the substance that's actually killing them, that they think is saving it. And then here's the aftercare plan, and here's the plan where we will give you the foundation, because rehab is basically just a big month to get ready for an aftercare, right? You acutely treat the illness, you remove the substance, you try and give a month of sobriety as a runway to rely on, and then you give these steps that you should follow. And that's how you can get your way through it, because the further you get from your last substance use, the better the odds of you remaining abstinent for the rest of your life. And I think that that's just such an important key and especially because families, I have an Italian mom, they think they can solve everything, and it's earnest. It's not fake. They really think that if you have their chicken soup, that you'll be better. Or you have their sauce, you'll be better. And sometimes you are. But sadly, that doesn't actually solve anything. And the understanding of that in the family aspect of the treatment is just such an essential component that's not as discussed as just the patient.
And, we often do this because I want to make sure as many people hear about it as possible. But tonight, and every Wednesday night at 6:00 is our New England Recovery Center and Spectrum Magnolia Family Support Meeting. And it's completely free. And so, not just in the acute time of treatment, do we, one of Jesse's roles with us has been as a family engagement specialist, right? We really support the whole family. We also offer ongoing weekly support, whether you're in New England Recovery Center or Spectrum programming or not, but to the general public nationally. So anybody listening today, you can just email magnolia@spectrumhealthsystems.org, and we can put it in some of the notes. You will get the link for the support meeting so that families can get a better understanding of what this is, and that it's not just removing the substance and everything will be okay. How do you support folks long term? So Chris, one of my last questions for you is, how do you support your recovery today? What does your recovery plan look like? How do you keep that front and center?
So I have therapy about 90 minutes a week. I have 2 separate therapy sessions, which are essential for me. And for the last about year or so, I became a father last July 8th. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So I have a son named James, and I had put on a bit of weight during the pandemic. I think we all may have at some point or another. And I've just begun about 90 minutes of walking. I live in South Boston, so I do 2 loops at Castle Island. I try every day around a nap or, some free time. And so the therapy plus exercise to me is, and it's not like I used to go like running all the time, and I'm too old for that. So this is something where I'm able to really clear my head. And it's when I stopped drinking and I got home, I'm in the same place as I was. And but it's totally different. I would just start exercising because everybody said the key to feeling better early in recovery is to start changing how you view yourself in a positive way, in a healthy way. And so it's the same walk I've taken for 7+ years. And it's just so, it's almost, I mean, I'm not a very spiritual person. No issues with anybody that is. But it is almost spiritual to me because it's the same walk, but it's different every day. And it just is so important for me to just listen to something that isn't sports radio, relax, and do that. So it's really therapy. And other thing is just being honest about the little things, even when it doesn't really matter. I lied about everything when I was drinking. I would say, what color are your shoes? I'm wearing white shoes right now. I'd say they're blue, just for no reason, just because. Why would you care? Because I always think I always would put some reason that they were asking that was ill-intended or calling me a liar when in fact I was lying about everything. So being grounded and just sort of being honest when you're having a tough day. You have families. We all have family members that go through health scares, and being honest with your family about how you love them, but you're scared. How are they doing? I always call it telling on yourself. It's there's inertia in life, and once you start going, for me, once I view it as I start lying about how I'm feeling or lying about whatever to my therapist, then I just feel like I'm heading right back to the bottle. So I keep myself accountable by trying to be, if it's too hard to tell it to the person directly, to talk to my therapist about it and at least be in a honest with yourself in a setting that you feel like you will not be judged.
That's wonderful, Chris. That's wonderful. And I do agree that taking that walk, not only builds consistency. I heard you say that it's different every time, even though it's the same physical loop around there. I would also consider that a form of meditation, maybe even, because you're making intent time. For anyone listening that thinks meditation or spirituality, these terms that you've heard kicked around here, just seem too big to grasp. Start small. Start with the practical stuff, the walk, right? I also liked how you said that you used to run, but not anymore. And so often I'm guilty of that all or nothing thinking, right? If I don't have time to run a 5K, then I'm not even going to walk around the block, because what's the point, right? But we start small, and then it turns into 2 loops at Castle Island, not eating any of the good food at Sullivan's, right, and using it as exercise, and also a time to meditate and to listen to whatever is not sports talk radio. So I think that's great, Chris. And another of the last questions that we always like to ask here, is if there's a resource that you use. You talk about therapy, you talk about exercise. Is there a podcast that you listen to about recovery, or a book, or some other sort of resource?
There is a book. Oh my God. Could it be High Achiever? So there is a book. I'm going to remember it. So I've read it twice. So it's about a woman who was married and happy, or she had this life that was high achieving, and she was caught stealing and selling drugs. And then it's sort of one chapter about her now, and one chapter, the next one's about the time back then. I'll try and remember it.
You're right. It's High Achiever. Is it Tiffany Jenkins?
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
I follow her on social media too. She's quite funny.
She is hilarious, and she's had like 15 kids and 3. I don't know. She had a bunch of kids after she got clean. It's amazing. But the raw honesty that she shared is, for me, it was like I got goosebumps, because it was exactly the desperation of where she's like, this guy that she was with was this great guy, and he was just so caring, and he loved her, and the only thing that mattered to her was getting the drugs. And the where she began with addiction and where she ended, and how she ended, and never in a million years would she envisioned that would be where these drugs took her. And the way in which she discusses her life and the people, we all, especially in early recovery, we all meet people who have no idea the lasting impact that they'll have on our lives. And, I talked about Tom LeDuc. I haven't seen him. I got his email. I emailed him like a picture of my son, and, he gets excited. But, when your family member or someone you love is in early addiction, you're never doing too much supporting. It is such a scary time. And it's also very scary for the family because they're almost, they don't want to do the wrong thing. They're so consumed with the sobriety of their loved one that it almost creates further distance when less distance is required. And so it's just, that's, reading about this stuff. I actually thought that Matthew Perry did a pretty good job in his book. Wasn't quite as, it didn't hit me the same way Tiffany Jenkins' book did, but there's nothing in addiction that I won't, read about and understand. And I also think that New England Recovery Center is so essential post-pandemic. The amount of people that suffered alone. The first thing I saw, if anybody wants to see something interesting, there's a TED Talk about Mice City. And it was this guy, they showed it to me when I was in recovery, and it's early in recovery, and there's a feeder that has an opioid. And there's one place with one mouse, and then there's another place where there's double the opiates and two mice. And in every instance, the opiate use in the one with two mice is always almost non-existent, whereas when the mouse is alone, it is constantly consuming. And it's just the best way for us to understand on the most basic level how being alone is the single one thing that you need to not do when you're early in recovery. And that if you have someone in your life that is in early recovery, your presence is never a problem. It's just something that we all should really understand.
And we say it all the time here, right? But, particularly in the pandemic, we ran this podcast throughout the pandemic, right? Whatever ways you can, like on Zoom, like I feel like we're talking together right now, right? Even though we're not in the same physical space, but of course, there's no replacement for being in the same physical space, but, addiction thrives in isolation and recovery thrives in connection.
Yeah. And I just always laugh. Because when I was drinking, there was no Drizzly or anything, and thank God for that. But we closed gyms. We didn't allow people to go to the doctor, and we allowed people to get booze and food delivered to their house in perpetuity. So thankfully those days have passed, but it was a very difficult time. And I think we're still seeing the ramifications of that.
Great. Chris, this has been wonderful. I know many might have heard your story, might have heard you share it on the radio. You're so open and honest about it, living by exactly what you described keeps your recovery in the forefront. But this has been a real gift for you to join us here for Recovery Month. And thanks so much for all of your support of New England Recovery Center and for all of your support of those, suffering with addiction and working towards recovery really everywhere. This has been great.
Oh, well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Lisa.
Thanks so much, Chris. It was great to hear your story and the sports connection. I've talked about a few times here. It's great that you're doing your dream job and you're doing it sober and you're using that as a tool to help people. And I guess in closing, I think it's just important to note that, you talked about your story on the radio and, have this connection with New England Recovery Center. And here we are today, sort of on the other end of that spectrum, no pun intended, where you're on the New England Recovery Center's podcast. So, we never know what the impact of our story is going to be. And, it sounds like, through being so open and honest, you've been able to help a lot of people in recovery. And that's a great power example for Recovery Month, for, anybody struggling, listening to this, family members. Again, like Lisa said, we run the Fats Magnolia Family Support Group every Wednesday night. It's free. It's on Zoom. We have people from all over the country that pop in. If you're interested, Magnolia at spectrumhealthsystems.org. You'll get the link. It's completely free. and there's help out there. So thank you again, Chris, for everything. To anyone listening live, happy Recovery Month. We will see you again next week with a brand new podcast. Be well. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Be well.